So now let's put this all together, right? Let's say, okay, now if we type in some text and we say, hey, we would like to create a rhino, for instance, how does it know? Well, how does it know what a rhino looks like? It might have been trained on some images for rhinos, but maybe not. And is it still able to create a rhino if it never has seen a rhino? And the answer is yes, right? It depends on the training. There are options that it can create something that it has never seen based just on the model that it has looked at, based on the meta information that's part of the model. There is, for instance, some pre-trained text embeddings, the text-to-vector embeddings. You can see a simple illustration of it on the right side, where you have certain words associated very closely to one another. It's a two-dimensional, sometimes three-dimensional space, where you say, okay, you know what? If we have a rhino, it has certain characteristics, like it's probably gray, it possibly has 4 thick legs, it has 1 or 2 horns, it has a short tail, it has a very specific skin texture, and it has specific postures it stands in, right? It can't stand on 2 legs, for instance. So all this information is composed as meta information in these text embeddings, right? And you can see if something, let's say our rhino is somewhere, if we have an animal text embedding, for instance, let's say our rhino is up here in that blue area on the top side of this vector graphic, then any picture or any point that is also blue around it is somehow closely related to the rhino. And the closer it is to the word rhino, the more importance it has. And so when we ask or write a prompt, hey, I would like a rhino, it not only knows what a rhino is based on the images that it has been trained on, it also knows based on the meta information from these text embeddings that, hey, whatever I'm creating, I need to make sure I have 4 thick legs. I need to have a horn, at least one, probably a short tail. If it's from the front, I don't see it, but if it's from the side or from the back, the tail is probably short. It has a certain skin texture I need to create and a certain color I need to use. I can't just make the rhino red unless the user asks for it, right? But this kind of stuff is all meta information that is used. And now, even if that model has never seen the image of a rhino, like it's been trained on all animals, but not a rhino ever, but it has text embedding vector graphics like this, where all the images are accompanied with information about it, it will still be able to create something. It might not create something that we would say, yeah, that's a rhino, that's photorealistic, but it will say, okay, we have to create an animal that stands on 4 thick legs. We'll make it gray, give it a certain texture, and it's going to have a horn. So whether it's going to be for us looking like a unicorn or a rhino, well, different question, but it will still be able to create something somehow reflecting a rhino at least. And then if we run this locally, right, we can go through the process and say, okay, where do we start? Where do we end? How many steps do we have? How does this image develop? And typically when we start at step 0, we start with just some random noise, right? And it really doesn't matter what that noise is. It can be absolutely random, like just a random multicolor, something that doesn't reflect anything. But based on additional steps that we go through, every iteration will closer resemble what we want. And if we go through the steps here and say, hey, step 5, art critic, is this a rhino? The art critic will say, oh, no, that's not a rhino. Step 10, the art critic will say, no, that's still not a rhino. Step 20, the art critic will say, you know, that could be a rhino. There could be something else too. I'm not so sure yet, right? It could be a hippo, could be a rhino. I'm not so sure. Let's go. Let's continue. I'm not 100% certain yet. Then step 40, the art critic or the discriminator in the model, right, says, you know what? It kind of looks like a rhino. We still have a little problem here because, we have a horn where an ear should be. So we have to make sure, based on the meta information, I know it has 2 ears. This is a horn instead of an ear. And the color in the front doesn't fit, right? It's not supposed to be orange on the horns. So now let's put this all together, right? Let's say, okay, now if we type in some text and we say, hey, we would like to create a rhino, for instance, how does it know? Well, how does it know what a rhino looks like? It might have been trained on some images for rhinos, but maybe not. And is it still able to create a rhino if it never has seen a rhino? And the answer is yes, right? It